So anyways, I just started blasting.
Making contact with enemy.
Target spotted.
Rings around the corner and we've got...
Reloading. Enemy down.
Down another.
And that's the extent of my crappy Apex Legends playing skills. I won't bore you with the rest because I died a lot just to get you that footage. Anyways, we haven't done a prop video in a long time, and I think I need to fix that. So I'm revisiting some of the older builds that I didn't really do much justice to from last year. Like this RE-45 print from Apex Legends. But before we get into that, my name's Yasu. I run a little 3D print prop shop called Hero Creations where I make replica costumes, props, and armors from your favorite video games, television shows, and movies. Let's get into it. For this build, I used an Anycubic Photon and an experimental casting resin I was playing with at the time. No idea what it's called or if it's available to buy since it did smell like vanilla yogurt. After a few days of printing, I had all the bits printed. Now, unfortunately, I learned the hard way not to cure parts before removing supports. Needless to say, removing supports was rough and left some damage on the surface that I would have to later fix. Since the supports had been cured really well to the parts, I had to use side cutters to clip off the supports as close as I could. So I did learn some other lessons as I was removing the supports. The big one being is don't put your supports or don't position the part too close to the build plate. You want to have some space for the supports to fully develop and sort of extend. Otherwise, if it's too close to the build plate, you'll get this what looks like a pooling effect where the edges and like flat surfaces are soft and it looks like resin just pooled, and that's really what actually happens is the resin pools around the supports that can't drain away quickly enough between peel sessions. So definitely want to put some space between your supports and the build plate. The other neat thing I discovered in this is that support skates in Chitubox are the best, because you can have a much easier time with the chamfered edge in getting underneath the skates and peeling it up off the build plate. So it's easier to remove from the build plate. I also discovered that Chitubox had placed some really funky supports in the grip that had embedded the supports halfway in. So I clipped them as best I could and prepared to clean the rest. There were definitely lots of rough spots that needed cleaning. Now that the parts were free of supports, I jumped straight into sanding to clean up some of the rougher parts to erase any trace of supports. For the very rough spots that were not even close to being flat, I used medium grit metal rasps to quickly remove material. Then I stepped down to finer diamond-coated needle files. As you can see here, sanding or grinding resin kicks up a lot of dust. So definitely two things I learned quickly and implemented is wear gloves, because dust is super fine and it doesn't wash off your hands pretty easily. Like I had to really scrub to get some of the dust off. And obviously, because the dust is so fine, respirator. Protect your lungs, because no costume, no prop is worth cancer or some other debilitating disease 20 years down the line. Once the rough spots and the partially embedded supports in the grip were filed down, I traded a rasp for some Harbor Freight sanding sponges. A few light passes handled some of the voxeling on the shallow angles. Now I made a pretty big mistake here. I started assembling and gluing the parts together before printing, which, considering the pieces were in whole separate sections, I would have been much better off priming and painting them separately, then gluing and assembling them together. Instead, you get to watch me make this mistake and struggle a lot later on when I'm painting. In terms of glue, I tried a couple different options, but ironically, the best in this particular circumstance was good old-fashioned Bob Smith Industries. I think it's called Bob Smith Industries super glue, or cyanoacrylate. Because this particular resin, in reviewing the datasheets, was an acrylate-based resin, I found it bonded extremely well, and I ended up, like, when I tried to pull pieces apart, it'd literally chip off resin before the bond broke, which is a good thing, I suppose. But the other thing I found is that gluing parts together that had some sort of connecting dowel or interlocking joints had a much, much better time of holding together than two edges flush together. Super glue works okay for two flush edges, but you know, any sort of lateral force from the side and you get problems. Somewhere in the cleanup process, I also discovered that the support removal had taken chunks of the parts with them, which meant I had to do a bit of filling and cleaning. Initially, I tried my go-to of Bondo spot putty, but I quickly discovered that the adhesion was a bit hit and miss, and often the putty would just flake right off once I started sanding. My solution ended up being to take a dropper of uncured resin, drop a drop into the area I needed filled, spread it slightly with my finger, and then hit the uncured resin with a UV flashlight to cure it in seconds. Once cured, I sanded it smooth and you couldn't even tell there was damage to start with. This trick also works remarkably well for filling in seam lines between pieces that you want to have a seamless effect on. So once I was satisfied that there were no print lines or blemishes, it's time to paint. Just because it's a resin print does not mean you can skip primer. So on goes the gray Rust-Oleum filler primer, which covers the whole print very nicely. After priming, I moved on to spraying coats of flat black paint. Now remember what I said about assembling the prop first before painting was a mistake? Yeah, I probably could have gone by without the trouble of masking off everything had I just painted everything separately. So one of the reasons why I did a lot more sanding all over the parts, even though it wasn't strictly speaking necessary, like it looked really good straight off the printer, was I noticed there weren't necessarily print lines so much as what I've now come to understand is called voxeling, which is essentially where you have like the pixels. Remember, think of an LCD screen. You have pixels that make up the shape that you're trying to expose. And because those pixels are square, and even though they're tiny, so you're basically trying to take a rounded object and interpret it in squares, which is inevitably going to create these really rough textures, aka voxels. One of the things, if you don't want to be sanding all your parts, I found that works really well is anti-aliasing, which is activated in Chitubox and works for certain pairs, not all of them. At the time of filming this video, the Anycubic Photon didn't support anti-aliasing. Now I do believe they've corrected that in subsequent firmware updates. What anti-aliasing does is it blurs out those pixels, making the shapes appear a lot smoother. Not that masking tape's horribly expensive, but I did find and discover a few tricks in this build that helped cut down on the amount of masking tape and masking tape waste I produced. The first one being is masking only the direct edges of where I'm going to paint, and then tack down like a plastic bag to cover up the rest of the prop. So you can see this prominently done when I'm doing the barrel, but not wanting to get any overspray on the grip. What I do is I put the appropriate masking tape around the spots I wanted to cover up, but then on the other side towards the grip, I put a plastic bag, you know, just a typical produce bag from your grocery store, or even just a regular shopping bag, you know, the plastic shopping bags from your grocery store, around the handle, and tacked it down with masking tape. And I found that worked actually really well in keeping overspray off of parts and not use a boatload of masking tape in the process. Another useful masking thing I discovered is for like really weird curves or angles that masking tape doesn't really handle well. Like, I mean, you can spend hours and hours cutting very, you know, intricate curves, but sometimes it's not close enough and you end up with this weird overspray that gets into the cracks and crevices that you have to brush over layer. Really, really annoying. I'm sure you've run into it. To fix that, I had actually a really good time using modeling clay, because it doesn't stick to the resin. And you know, and remember, use the oven bake, like a plasticine type modeling clay, not the air drying, because that's going to give you a bad time if it dried out. So what I do is then I'd kind of just press into the curved areas or the holes that masking tape doesn't work well in, and that masked it out really well. And then once you're done, you could either toss it, or in my case, I just, you know, put it in a plastic bag and save it for another use later on. You'll notice I swapped to an airbrush for the detailing, but in the end I decided that finishing up with a regular brush would be best for my sanity, as the overspray, even with masking, was starting to get really annoying. Once I was satisfied with the base layers, I applied a tiny bit of edge wear with a dry brush to better match the reference pictures. And boom! That's how I made the RE-45 from Apex Legends. I hope you found this video entertaining, interesting, educational, something of value to you. If you really want to see more videos like these, feel free to smash that subscribe button and hit that like button. It helps me know what videos to make in the future. Feel free, if you want, if I wasn't clear on anything in this video, feel free to ask questions, comments, toss out suggestions, whatever. The comment section is for you. And if you didn't like this video for any reason at all, feel free to double tap that dislike button. Anyways, I'll be back with another prop video hopefully pretty soon, probably the glass axe or one of my other builds from 2019 before I jump into some of the exciting builds I have coming up for 2020. Anyways, Yasu out, see you in the next video.